Hello, my name is Dr. Jacqueline Renishek, and I'm with DTP-Leadership Group. This is Hot Topic Bold Talk. And I want to talk about the silencing of the vote and also how there's an amplifying of the voices in America. Now, how the Supreme Court assaulted voting rights collided with a rising wave of resistance in America and across the world. But the tragedy is, I'm going to have to talk about something that I lived through. I was when in 1965, when the Civil Rights Act was put into effect, I saw a major change in the way we acted in America toward not only African Americans, but all individuals of race. So I lived in the 40s, 50s, and part of the 60s until the Civil Rights Act in a world that is very much like Trump. And it is disturbing to see what happened. So I want to talk to you about some of the real concerns I have. And I don't think it matters what political party you are. It doesn't matter what your background is. It doesn't matter where you live. It impacts all of us. When groups of people lose the right to be represented in the United States, then we are only a little bit away from other groups losing the same thing. Because what I have witnessed is that what is happening right now in the Supreme Court is a political moment. It is an effort to structure our democracy in a very different way and with different foundation. And it's happening in real time. The Supreme Court of the United States has delivered a decision that legal experts are already calling devastating, one that strikes at the heart of the Voting Rights Act of 1965, specifically Section 2, which has long been one of the most remaining protections against racial discrimination in voting. Now, I'm well aware that we have become under Trump one of the most racist societies I've seen in a long time. And I can't believe the number of Christian nationalists that think they're doing the right thing. They don't even have an understanding of what they're doing. I think they are so afraid of not having white domination that they're doing anything to destroy the rights of others in our country to have themselves represented, but also have a voice. Now, at the same time, though, people are refusing to be silent. So today I'm going to walk you through both sides of this reality. First, what the Supreme Court has done and why it matters far more than many people realize. And second, despite all this, there's a growing wave of resistance that cannot be ignored. So let's look at the reality. There were promises made in the Voting Rights Act of 1965. It was the foundation of so many things that have changed and made us a socially just and a country that loved human beings no matter what and how different they were from us. So I want to remind you that Richard Wilson and I have already given you a great deal of information about the Calais case because we covered it in podcast 147 and 143. But what I thought I would do for you is to give you a lot of new details and thoughts I have about living in that era and now living now. And not only that, giving you kind of a summary of the various cases so that you can understand the damage that is being done by this decision. And for a little bit, I thought the Roberts Court he might do something decent, but he did not. I personally think his court will be viewed as one of the worst led courts, Supreme Courts in the United States history. And I don't think I'm the only one that thinks it. There are plenty of people writing about it. Now, the Voting Rights Act of 1965 was not just legislation, it was a promise born out of the civil rights movement, out of Selma, out of Bloody Sunday, out of people being beaten, jailed, and even killed for demanding the right to vote. It was the federal government stepping in and saying, no American shall be denied their voice because of their race. And for decades, the promise was held because it had real reinforcement. And it could be enforced. There are two critical components that made it work. Section 5 required a pre-clearance, which required certain states with histories of discrimination to get federal approval before changing voting laws. One of them was Florida, which sometimes has just changed everything in that state to support Republicans having more power and eliminating Democrats from having their rights of being represented in that state. So it prevented those kind of actions. Section 2, which allowed citizens to challenge the discriminatory practices in court, was another strong part of it. One stopped discrimination because it happened. The other one allowed it to be challenged when it did happen. So together they created a system of accountability. But the system has been under attack for years. So let's look at the first major blow. In 2013, the Supreme Court struck the first major blow in Shelby County versus Holder. Chief Justice John Roberts argued that the country had changed, that the extraordinary protection of the 1960s were no longer necessary. That is one of the most foolish things I believe I've ever heard in my life. Racism is alive and well, and it is getting worse. And this decision makes it much worse. When the narrows the decision, it states previous subjects to federal oversight began implementing restrictive voting laws. So that's when we started seeing in 2013 gerrymandering. And it came from specific states that had to go through the clearance process in Section 5 of the Voting Rights Act. Laws that had been blocked before because they were discriminatory, that moment should have been a warning. And now we're seeing what comes next. Here's the long game that Roberts has been playing. And this didn't happen overnight. As the New York Times describes in its analysis of Chief Justice Roberts' voting rights record, this has been a long game, a deliberate, decades-long effort to narrow the reach of the Voting Rights Act. From Roberts' early work in the Reagan administration opposing strong enforcement to Shelby County, to the decision we are now facing, this had been a consistent trajectory, step by step, case by case, until we reach this moment. So here's what the Supreme Court did. The Supreme Court's latest ruling targets Section 2, the last major tool available to challenge racial discrimination in voting. And while the court did not eliminate Section 2 outright, it has made it dramatically hard to use and therefore enforce states that are doing racial discrimination, like Florida, like Texas. The American Constitutional Society has said that the decision effectively completes the demolition of the Voting Rights Act. Public Citizen went even further, warning that the ruling effectively allows racist voter suppression to continue without meaningful legal challenge. That is dreadful. This is not a small claim that I'm making. But when you look at what the court has done, it becomes very hard to argue otherwise, because this is how rights are dismantled today. Not always by saying you no longer have them, but by making them impossible to enforce. If you can enforce easily when states do discriminatory things like Florida is doing recently, then you have a very hard time establishing and getting things done the way you need them done. So what does this really mean? Let's bring this out of the legal language and into the real world. This really makes it much harder to challenge racial gerrymandering, and that matters because gerrymandering is not just about politics, it's about power. It's about districts that are drawn. It's about who's grouped with whom. And it's about voices of groups of people being diluted. As the conversationalist, which is a favorite of mine, one of the resources, the conversationalist explains in its analysis, this decision is going to reshape the electoral map of America. It will give states greater freedom to draw districts that dilute minority voting power without being held accountable in court. That means communities can be split apart or packed into small numbers of districts so that their overall influence is reduced. And when that happens, representation is suffered by those individuals who are no longer represented. Democracy suffers. Now, this is a very dangerous shift. What we are seeing is a shift from protection to creating an illusion that the protection's still there, but it can't be enforced. So it is an illusion. The Civil Rights Act still is written, but it has no power because it's been stripped by the Supreme Court decision. Section 5 is gone. Section 2 is weakened, and what remains is the appearance of protection without the ability to enforce it, as I've said several times. This is a very dangerous place for democracy to be because it creates the illusion that the rights are still intact, when in reality, the rights are slipping away. And as a Caucasian, I think all of us Caucasians need to stand together and say, it's enough, Trump. It's enough, Supreme Court. We're going to make decisions about you. We're going to make it hard for you to take away the rights of American citizens. And why is this about power? Let me be very clear. This is not just about legal theory. This is about power. When you weaken protection for minority voters, you weaken their ability to elect representatives. And when you weaken representation, you change who gets heard in America on healthcare, on education, on economic opportunities, on justice. This is about democracy being reshaped quietly, structurally, and profoundly. Now, if we were looking the whole story, it would be deeply discouraging, but it's not because something else is happening at the same time. I don't know about you, but I'm sick of it. And I've seen all kinds of signs that I won't say here because some of them are pretty risque about Trump and about what's happening in America. And people are refusing to be silent. I want to start with the global signals, though, first, before I go to what's happening in the United States. In a recent Time magazine article, King Charles III emphasized that the relationship between the United States and the United Kingdom is more important than ever. But the statement came with a clear signal, because at the same time, he distanced himself from key policies associated with Donald Trump, particularly on climate change and global cooperation. And not only that, he made it very clear to watch and prevent executive extension of power. Now, this is significant because monarchs do not typically talk or speak in direct political terms. They signal, and his signal was unmistakable. Yes, the alliance between Great Britain and the United States remains, but the alignment does not. That reflects growing concern about the direction of the U.S. policy on the global stage. And he was gutsy enough to make that speech before our Congress. Now, King Charles has long been an advocate for environmental responsibility. His position stands in direct contrast to policies that have happened with Trump, Trump withdrawing from the international climate agreements, undermining scientific consensus, and weakening global cooperation. This is not just a different policy, it is a different set of values that we are now looking at. And it raises questions about credibility, how the United States is viewed by its allies. Now let's look at the Iran issues. We see the same pattern in foreign policy. The New York Times reports that efforts to eliminate Iran's nuclear stockpile are now facing serious challenges. And why? Because the United States, Trump, decided to withdraw from the Iran nuclear agreement, the one that Obama did, that protected us and set up very complex ways that Iran could not do certain things. That agreement had imposed limits and oversight. So when it was dismantled, those restraints disappeared. So I don't think Trump even sees the consequences that he has created. The war he has going on, he was never planned. It had no strategy. And now he's created even more consequences because he removed himself in our country from the Iran nuclear agreement, trying to solve a problem that was developed and designed through the Obama administration that gave a much more complex way of looking at Iran and eliminating Iran's opportunities to do many things. Trump ignored it, didn't even see the value of the nuclear agreement. Now let's talk about the resistance at home. And I've talked about it before, but I want to say it differently tonight. Now let's come back, because resistance is not just happening globally. Our position in the world is deteriorating significantly. Trump's behavior is so outrageous, and what the mega Republicans are doing in Congress is even more outrageous. So what we're seeing on the global community is that Europe is deciding to unite together without involvement with the United States. And it is happening. It is also happening in our country. Across the country, people are speaking out. Courts are pushing back. For an example, a court has decided that people have the right to request entrance into the United States. And then right after that, the Justice Department decides to say, well, if you want to come into the United States and you're afraid of being sent back to your country, then maybe you shouldn't come. It's the most ridiculous arguments you will ever see. I think it's interesting, too, that there are so many things written now about the incompetency of Trump and each one of the people that serves him. I think communities are really organizing. I'm seeing it constantly. Activist groups are mobilizing. Even political reporting from the outlets like the Washington Post show that documenting growing pressure by them and looking at the instability of many of our systems. When the CDC wants to publish how the deaths would have been massive if they had not made decisions, and they have all kinds of reports, and then to look at other articles that talk about the greatest amount of deaths occurred during COVID. Who was president? Trump. So he's not only killing people in the United States with the violence he preaches, but he has also killed people. And that's the reason he wasn't reelected. And that's the problem. People have forgotten what he did. Even political reporting, such as the Washington Post, gives us a much clearer picture of what is going on here. I've said it before and I'll say it again. Our democracy is under strain. However, people are not quiet, they're not passive, and they are definitely active. What we are seeing is a very big decision. And yet there are people saying, like me, and like a lot of other people in America, I am not going to support the discrimination of African Americans or Asians or Hispanics or any group from not having representation that they need to have a voice in our country. They help to create some very creative ideas we've had in America that have helped us to advance forward. And Trump is only moving us back, whether it's around science or whether it's around any other idea. So it is a struggle about the direction of democracy. So you and I have to be committed. We need to stop the effort of control. We need to share and stand forth. And because the actions I'm seeing and witnessing is that voting rights are being institutionally controlled by the Supreme Court and Trump and his mega Republicans. They're not connected to anything. They don't care what the impact is. If they benefit from it, they're going to keep doing it. But those of us that are aligned and fighting back, he only has 29% support in America by the polls. It's getting even worse. So what has happened is there is a reflection that is shaping a new influence. And we're all saying, who has access? I want everyone to have access. That's true for Trump and his megas. And ultimately, you and I have to use our voice. So here we are. The Supreme Court has weakened one of the most important civil rights protections in American history. And I feel great sadness about it because I know what it meant when President Johnson signed it. And it's real, but people are not going to back down. That is also real, and that's what matters. And you cannot back down. You need to start speaking out because democracy does not survive on laws alone. It survives on yours and I participating, of being engaged and refusing to allow any person to be pushed aside. Now, they may redraw their maps. We'll see how well gerrymandering does, because there's plenty of studies to show that even Republicans do not approve of it. We'll see how it helps megas, because there are a lot of Republicans, there are definitely a lot of Democrats and independents who do not like gerrymandering. So Trump and the Supreme Court may think they can weaken the laws, and they've tried for decades to do it. But democracy does not belong just to the courts alone. It is time for us as people, and right now, for people to refuse to ever be silent. Go back and read what the Civil Rights Act of 1965 in Section 5 and Section 2, what all did it mean? Because it is tragic, just like the destruction of Roe versus Wade. It has destroyed the rights of women in America. So I want to thank you for listening to me this evening. This is Hot Topic, Bold Talk. And I hope that you will be supportive to me and give me an opportunity to have you as a listener or a reader of my blogs, which gives you even more detail about what I thought about when forming podcast 174. Thank you so much.